The gunshot echoed across the dusty plains of New Mexico Territory, 1873, shattering the morning stillness as Dr. Olivia Calloway's trembling hands pressed against the wound of yet another man who had refused her help until desperation drove him to her door. Blood seeped between her fingers as she worked, her medical bag open beside her on the wooden floor of her isolated cabin, miles from the nearest settlement of Roswell. "You're lucky," she muttered, not looking the man in the eye as she cleaned and stitched his bullet wound. "Another inch to the left and we wouldn't be having this conversation." The wounded man, a cattle rustler if the brand on his horse was anything to go by, averted his gaze. "A female doctor," he spat, though his voice lacked conviction. "Ain't natural." Olivia didn't respond, used to such remarks after 3 years of practicing medicine in this harsh territory. She had graduated from the Woman's Medical College of Pennsylvania, one of the few institutions that would educate a woman in medicine. Her professors had warned her that the path would be difficult, but nothing could have prepared her for the hostility she encountered when she arrived in New Mexico, hoping to establish a practice where doctors were desperately needed. "That should hold," she said, tying off the last stitch. "Keep it clean, change the bandage daily, and next time someone draws on you, consider surrendering instead." The man threw a few coins on her table, less than her services were worth, but more than she expected, and limped out without another word. Olivia watched through her window as he mounted his horse with difficulty and rode away, another patient who would deny ever seeking her help. She washed the blood from her hands, scrubbing harder than necessary. At 32, Olivia had thought herself past caring about the town's rejection, but the loneliness still cut deep. Her red-gold hair, once her pride, was now simply pinned back severely to keep it out of her way as she worked. Her green eyes, which her mother had called her best feature, were shadowed with exhaustion. 3 miles away, the town of Roswell carried on without her. She provided medical care to those desperate enough to seek her out: outlaws, prostitutes, traveling peddlers, and occasionally, families with no other option. The town doctor, old Dr. Hemsworth, had died 6 months ago, yet still the townspeople would rather suffer than acknowledge her skills. Olivia closed her medical bag and placed it back on the shelf. Another day in exile. The following morning dawned bright and clear, the New Mexico sky a brilliant blue above the scrubland surrounding her cabin. Olivia was tending to her small garden when she heard the approach of horses, more than one, moving at speed. She straightened, hand instinctively reaching for the revolver she kept at her waist. Living alone as she did, self-protection was a necessity, not a choice. 3 riders appeared on the horizon, and as they drew closer, Olivia recognized the lead rider as Jake Lawson, one of the most respected ranchers in the territory. His rocking L ranch employed half the men in the county, and his word carried weight from Roswell to Santa Fe. Jake Lawson pulled his chestnut stallion to a halt before her, dust billowing around the animal's legs. His face was grim beneath his wide-brimmed hat, his jaw set hard beneath several days' growth of beard. At around 35, he was in his prime, tall and broad-shouldered, with eyes the color of a winter sky and dark hair streaked with sun-bleached strands. "Dr. Calloway," he said, touching the brim of his hat in a gesture that surprised her with its courtesy. "Mr. Lawson," she replied cautiously. She had never treated the man, had in fact never exchanged more than a passing word with him in town before she'd been effectively exiled. "What brings you to my door, my foreman?" Jake said, gesturing to the men behind him. They were supporting a third man between them, barely conscious. Walter took a fall while breaking a new Mustang, his legs broken, bad bones sticking through. Olivia felt a surge of professional concern, quickly suppressed by wariness. "The town of Roswell is only 3 miles from here," she said. "Surely you'd prefer to take him there." Jake Lawson's expression hardened. "There's no doctor in town now, as you well know. The nearest one's in Lincoln, 2 days' ride away. Walter won't last that long." "I see," Olivia said, stepping back and gesturing toward her door. "Bring him in." The men carried Walter inside, placing him on the examination table Olivia kept in what had once been a dining room. She moved efficiently, cutting away the blood-soaked denim to reveal a compound fracture of the tibia, the white bone jutting obscenely through torn flesh. "This will be painful," she warned, preparing her instruments. "Hold him down." Jake moved to Walter's shoulders, pressing him firmly against the table. "Do what you need to do, doctor." The respect in his voice was new and unexpected, but Olivia had no time to dwell on it. She administered what laudanum she could spare, then set about the gruesome task of cleaning, reducing, and splinting the fracture. Walter passed out halfway through, a mercy for all involved. 2 hours later, she stepped back, wiping sweat from her brow. "The bone's set, but infection is the real danger now. He needs to stay here where I can monitor him." Jake nodded, studying her with an intensity that made Olivia uncomfortable. "You're not what I expected," he said finally. "And what did you expect, Mr. Lawson? Call me Jake." He removed his hat, revealing the full impact of those piercing blue eyes. "And to be honest, I'm not sure the story's in town." "I'm aware of the stories," Olivia cut him off. "I'm either a witch, a harlot, or an incompetent who bought her medical degree. Take your pick." Jake's mouth twitched. "I'm beginning to think none of those are accurate. Your foreman needs rest," Olivia said, unwilling to continue the conversation. "You and your men can water your horses at the well. There's coffee on the stove if you want it." Jake studied her for a moment longer, then nodded and stepped outside with his men. Olivia busied herself with cleaning her instruments, trying to ignore the strange sensation in her chest like something long dormant was stirring to life. Walter remained unconscious through the night, his fever rising despite Olivia's best efforts. Jake sent his men back to the ranch but refused to leave himself, settling into a chair by the patient's side. "You should get some rest," Olivia told him around midnight after checking Walter's dressings. "I'll wake you if there's any change." Jake shook his head. "Walter's been with me since I established the rocking L. I'm staying." Olivia nodded, understanding loyalty when she saw it. She prepared a pot of coffee and brought him a cup. "Thank you," he said, taking it from her hands. Their fingers brushed briefly, and Olivia felt an unexpected jolt of awareness. "Do you mind if I ask you something?" She tensed but nodded. "Why here?" Jake asked. "Why Roswell?" "You're educated, clearly skilled. You could practice anywhere." Olivia hesitated, then sat down across from him. "My father was a doctor in Philadelphia. He believed women had no place in medicine, but he couldn't stop me from attending medical school. When he died 2 years after I graduated, I found he'd left everything to my brother except a small sum for me and a deed to land here, this land. I think he hoped I'd fail, far from civilization where no one would help me. And yet you came." "I had nowhere else to go," Olivia admitted. "And I thought, foolishly, that a frontier town would need a doctor badly enough to overlook my gender." Jake sipped his coffee, his expression thoughtful. "The town's full of fools then." The simple statement, so casually delivered, caught Olivia off guard. Before she could respond, Walter groaned, beginning to stir. Both of them moved to his side, the moment between them broken. Walter's fever broke toward dawn, and by midday, he was awake and aware enough to take broth. Jake visibly relaxed as his foreman's condition improved. "You saved his life," he said to Olivia as they stood outside her cabin, watching the sun climb higher in the sky. "I won't forget that. I'm a doctor, Mr. Lawson. It's what I do." "Jake," he corrected, "and it's more than that. The town's been without proper medical care for months. People are suffering for no reason except pride and ignorance." Olivia turned to face him fully. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying it's time things changed." His face was resolute, determined. "Walter needs to stay here for at least a week. I'll be back tomorrow with supplies and to check on him." He mounted his horse with the easy grace of a man who'd spent most of his life in the saddle. "Thank you, Dr. Calloway." "Olivia," she found herself saying, "if I'm to call you Jake." His smile transformed his face, softening the hard lines and lighting his eyes. "Olivia, then, until tomorrow." She watched him ride away, wondering what had just happened, and why she felt as though her isolated existence had suddenly shifted on its axis. True to his word, Jake returned the next day with supplies not just for Walter, but for Olivia as well. Food, coffee, sugar, even a bolt of fabric that would make a serviceable dress. "I can pay for my own supplies," she protested. "Considerate payment for Walter's care," Jake replied smoothly, "and for the inconvenience of having him underfoot." Over the next several days, Jake visited daily, sometimes staying for hours. He helped with the heavier chores around her cabin, fixed a leak in her roof, and brought news from town. Gradually, Olivia found herself looking forward to his visits, to the sound of his horse approaching, to the sight of him dismounting with that fluid grace. On the fifth day, as they sat on her porch watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and crimson, Jake turned to her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "There's an outbreak of fever in town," he said without preamble. "3 children died yesterday. 2 more families have sick ones." Olivia felt a cold weight settle in her stomach. What kind of fever? They don't know. Some say it's typhoid, some say scarlet fever. All they know is it's spreading and there's no one to help. "I see." Olivia stared out at the darkening landscape. "And you think they'll accept my help now, when they're desperate?" Jake's hand covered hers, warm and calloused. "I think they need to be shown that pride is a poor substitute for a doctor's care. Even a female doctor," his fingers tightened around hers. "Especially this female doctor." The next morning, Jake arrived with a wagon instead of his horse. Walter, now able to move with the aid of crutches Olivia had fashioned, was loaded carefully into the back along with Olivia's medical supplies. "Are you sure about this?" Olivia asked, hesitating before climbing up to the wagon seat. "No," Jake admitted with a wry smile, "but I'm sure about you." The ride to Roswell was tense, Olivia's heart pounding harder with each turn of the wagon wheels. As they approached the town, she could see how quiet it was. No children playing in the streets, fewer people than usual moving between buildings. Fear had settled over Roswell like a shroud. Jake pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the mercantile, which also served as the town's meeting place. A small crowd gathered, their expressions ranging from suspicious to openly hostile. As Olivia climbed down, Mayor Harrison pushed his way forward, his florid face darkening when he saw her. "Lawson, what is the meaning of this? You know this. Woman is not welcome here." Jake stepped forward, placing himself subtly between Olivia and the mayor. "3 children are dead, Harrison. How many more need to die before you put aside your foolish prejudices? We've sent for a doctor from Lincoln, who won't arrive for days if he comes at all." Jake cut him off. "Meanwhile, Dr. Calloway is here now. She saved Walter's life when he broke his leg so badly the bone was sticking through his skin." He gestured to his foreman in the wagon. "She can help the sick children if you'll let her." A woman pushed forward Martha Jenkins, whose youngest had been one of the first to fall ill. "Is it true?" she demanded, addressing Olivia directly. "Can you help my Sarah?" Olivia met her gaze steadily. "I can try, Mrs. Jenkins. I'm a fully qualified doctor, trained at the Women's Medical College in Philadelphia. I've treated fevers before." Martha looked from Olivia to her husband, who stood rigid with disapproval, then back to Olivia. "My oldest died yesterday," she said, her voice breaking. "Sarah's all I have left. I don't care if you're a woman or the devil himself. If you can save her, please try." A murmur went through the crowd. Mayor Harrison began to protest, but Jake's voice cut through the noise. "I'm bringing Dr. Calloway to the Jenkins place," he announced. "Anyone who needs medical attention can find her there. Anyone who'd rather hold onto their prejudice than save their family is welcome to wait for the doctor from Lincoln if he comes in time." With that, he helped Olivia back into the wagon and drove toward the Jenkins farm at the edge of town. Behind them, the crowd buzzed with conflict and indecision. Sarah Jenkins lay burning with fever in her small bed, her face flushed crimson, her breathing labored. Olivia examined her thoroughly, noting the rash spreading across her chest and the telltale strawberry tongue. "It's scarlet fever," she told Martha and her husband, William. "I need clean water, fresh linens, and help preparing some medications." While Martha rushed to comply, William hung back, watching suspiciously. "How do I know you won't make her worse?" "You don't," Olivia said bluntly. "But she'll certainly die without treatment. The fever's very high, and if it continues, it could damage her brain or her heart." For 3 hours, Olivia bathed Sarah with cool water, administered willow bark tea to reduce the fever, and carefully monitored her condition. Jake remained nearby, bringing water, building up the fire when needed, and acting as a buffer between Olivia and William's lingering hostility. As the sun began to set, Sarah's fever finally broke. The little girl's eyes fluttered open, focusing slowly on her mother's tear-streaked face. "Mama." She whispered. Martha burst into tears, gathering her daughter into her arms. William slumped into a chair, his face in his hands. When he looked up, the hostility was gone from his eyes, replaced by something that looked suspiciously like shame. "Thank you," he said roughly. "I was wrong about you." "You're welcome," Olivia replied simply. By morning, word had spread through town. Sarah Jenkins was recovering, and the woman doctor had known exactly what to do. More families arrived at the Jenkins farm, bringing their sick children or coming themselves with various ailments long left untreated. Olivia worked tirelessly, moving from patient to patient, diagnosing, treating, advising. Jake stayed by her side, organizing the flow of people, ensuring she ate and drank when she could, and supporting her in 100 small ways that didn't go unnoticed. By the third day, it became clear that the Jenkins' small home couldn't accommodate all those seeking help. Mayor Harrison, who had not been seen since their arrival in town, suddenly appeared at the door. "Dr. Calloway," he said stiffly, "the town council has met and decided to offer you the use of Dr. Hemsworth's old office and residence. It's been sitting empty since his passing, and it seems appropriate that it should serve as a doctor's office again." Olivia exchanged a glance with Jake, who gave her a slight nod of encouragement. "That's very generous, Mayor," she said carefully. "I accept." The next day, Olivia moved into the small building on Main Street that had once been Dr. Hemsworth's practice. The ground floor consisted of a waiting room, examination room, and small dispensary. Upstairs was a modest but comfortable living space with 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, and a small sitting room. Jake helped her move her few possessions from the cabin, bringing additional furniture from his ranch to make the place more habitable. As they arranged the last of her medical books on the shelf in the sitting room, Olivia turned to him. "Why are you doing all this?" she asked directly. "You barely knew me a week ago." Jake placed the final book on the shelf before answering. "The first time I saw you was 2 years ago, shortly after you arrived in Roswell. You were in the general store buying supplies. A man came in with his son who'd cut his hand badly on a saw. Without hesitation, you offered to help, and when the man refused rather rudely, you simply gave him instructions on how to clean and bandage the wound properly." Olivia remembered the incident vaguely, one of many rejections she'd endured. "I was impressed," Jake continued, "but I was also a coward. I didn't speak up then, didn't offer support when the town turned against you. I regretted that, especially after Hemsworth died and I saw how the town suffered without a doctor. When Walter was injured, I finally had the excuse I needed to seek you out. So this is about guilt." Jake stepped closer, close enough that Olivia could see the flecks of darker blue in his eyes, smell the clean scent of soap and leather that clung to him. "This is about doing what's right," he said softly. "And about the fact that I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since the moment I saw you stitch up Walter's leg with steady hands and compassion in your eyes, even though the town had treated you so poorly." Olivia felt her breath catch. She wasn't naive at 32. She'd had suitors before, but something about Jake Lawson's direct gaze and honest words touched a part of her she'd thought long dormant. A knock at the door interrupted whatever might have happened next. Mrs. Jenkins stood there with Sarah, the little girl looking much recovered. "We brought a welcome gift," Martha said, holding out a basket. "Fresh bread and preserves, and Sarah wanted to see the doctor who saved her life." Jake stepped back and the moment passed, but the look in his eyes promised that the conversation wasn't over. Over the following weeks, Olivia's practice grew steadily. Not everyone accepted her. Some still made the long journey to Lincoln rather than consult a female physician, but enough of the town had seen her skill to keep her busy. Jake visited regularly, sometimes with legitimate ranch business, a cowhand with a sprained wrist or a cut that needed stitching, but often simply to bring her lunch or dinner, knowing she frequently forgot to eat when busy with patients. One evening in late October, as autumn painted the desert in russet hues, Jake invited Olivia to dinner at the Rocking L. She hesitated, aware that such a public outing would be noticed and discussed throughout Roswell. "Are you ashamed to be seen with me?" she asked bluntly. Jake laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "Quite the opposite. I want everyone to know that the most capable, courageous woman in the territory occasionally graces my table with her presence." Flustered by the compliment, Olivia agreed. The rocking Elticus main house was larger than she had expected, a solid two-story structure built of local stone and timber, with wide verandas and tall windows. Inside, it was comfortably furnished with a mix of locally crafted pieces and items clearly brought from back east. "This is lovely," Olivia said, genuinely impressed as Jake showed her through to a dining room where a table was set for two, candles already lit. "My mother's influence," Jake explained. "She insisted that even in the wilderness, one should maintain certain standards. She died 5 years ago, but I've tried to keep the place as she would have wanted it. And your father died when I was 18. He started the ranch with just 20 head of cattle. I've built it up since then." The dinner was simple but delicious: roast beef, potatoes, fresh bread, and apple pie for dessert, all prepared by Jake's housekeeper, a formidable woman named Mrs. Chen who had come west with her husband during the gold rush. When Mr. Chen died, Jake had offered her a position, knowing her reputation as an excellent cook. After dinner, they sat on the veranda, watching the stars appear in the vast New Mexico sky. Jake reached over and took Olivia's hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "I've been thinking," he said after a comfortable silence. "The town needs a proper hospital. Nothing grand, just a place with a few beds where patients too sick to stay at home can be cared for." Olivia turned to him, surprised. "That's a wonderful idea, but who would fund such a thing?" "The town council barely tolerates my presence." Jake's smile was confident. I have the means and I can convince others to contribute. The Rocking L is the largest employer in the county that carries some weight." "Jake, that's incredibly generous." "I have selfish motives," he admitted, his smile turning rueful. "I've seen you work yourself to exhaustion, trying to care for patients scattered across town, riding miles to remote homesteads at all hours. A hospital would make your life easier." "Why does that matter to you?" Olivia asked, her heart beating faster. Jake turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "Because I care about you, Olivia, more than I've cared about anyone in a very long time, maybe ever." The confession hung in the air between them, as delicate and momentous as a first snowfall. Olivia looked down at their joined hands, then back to Jake's face, moonlight casting his features in silver and shadow. "I care about you too," she said softly. "But Jake, my life is complicated. I've fought so hard for my independence, for the right to practice medicine. I can't give that up." "I would never ask you to," he said firmly. "Your work is part of who you are. It's one of the things I admire most about you. I'm not offering marriage, not yet anyway." His eyes crinkled with a smile. "I'm just asking if you might consider the possibility of us together, seeing where this leads." Olivia felt a weight lift from her shoulders. All her life, she had believed she would have to choose between her calling and love. The idea that she might have both was almost too much to hope for. "Yes," she whispered. "I'd like that very much." Jake's smile was brilliant in the moonlight. He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. When she didn't, he pressed his lips to hers in a gentle kiss that nonetheless sent warmth spiraling through her. The ride back to town was quiet, both of them savoring the newness of what had begun between them. At her door, Jake kissed her again, more deeply this time, before bidding her good night. Olivia floated up to her rooms, feeling younger and lighter than she had in years. The next few months passed in a whirlwind of activity. Jake was true to his word about the hospital, purchasing a vacant building near Olivia's office and overseeing its renovation. The town watched with mixed reactions, some approving, others still resistant to change, but no one could deny that Jake Lawson's influence was substantial. Olivia's practice continued to grow, and gradually, even some of her staunchest opponents began to seek her services. Mrs. Henderson, wife of one of the town councilmen, arrived one day with a painful abscess that needed lancing. After Olivia treated her with skill and discretion, Mrs. Henderson became one of her most vocal supporters. As winter settled over the territory, bringing colder temperatures but little snow to the desert landscape, Olivia found herself busier than ever. Colds, influenza, and injuries from ice-slicked walkways kept her working long hours. Jake visited when he could, sometimes just for a brief meal together between patients, sometimes for longer evenings by her fire, talking, reading, or simply enjoying each other's company. Their courtship was unconventional but deeply satisfying, a meeting of minds as well as hearts. On Christmas Eve, Jake invited Olivia to the Rocking L for a celebration with his ranch hands and their families. The main house was festooned with evergreen boughs, candles, and ribbons, creating a festive atmosphere despite being far from the traditional Christmas scenes of Olivia's Eastern childhood. After dinner and carol singing, as the hands drifted back to their quarters and Mrs. Chen retired for the night, Jake led Olivia to the sitting room where a fire crackled in the hearth and a small Christmas tree stood in the corner, decorated with paper stars and strings of cranberries. "I have something for you," he said, handing her a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with red ribbon. Inside was a slender gold chain bearing a delicate pendant, a small medical caduceus entwined with a tiny, perfect diamond. "Jake, it's beautiful," Olivia breathed. "Look at the back," he urged. She turned the pendant over to find an inscription. "To heal is to love." "It's what you do every day," Jake said softly. "You heal this town not just with medicine but with your courage and your compassion." Tears pricked at Olivia's eyes. "I don't know what to say. Say you'll wear it, and that you'll consider another gift as well." Jake reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. Olivia's breath caught as he dropped to one knee before her. "Olivia Calloway, I love you. I love your strength, your intelligence, your dedication to healing. I love the way you stand up for what you believe in, even when it's difficult. I want to build a life with you, a partnership where we support each other's dreams." He opened the box to reveal a ring with a sapphire surrounded by tiny diamonds. "Will you marry me?" Olivia looked at the man kneeling before her, his blue eyes filled with hope and love, and knew her answer without hesitation. "Yes," she said, her voice steady despite the tears now flowing freely. "Yes, I'll marry you." Jake slipped the ring onto her finger, then stood and pulled her into his arms, his kiss a promise of all they would share together. The wedding took place on a bright spring day in April, with the desert in bloom around them. The small church in Roswell was filled to capacity not just with Jake's friends and employees, but with many of Olivia's patients who had come to respect and even love their determined female doctor. Olivia wore a simple gown of ivory silk, her red gold hair adorned with desert wildflowers. Jake, resplendent in a new black suit, couldn't take his eyes off her as she walked down the aisle on the arm of Walter, who had insisted on the honor in lieu of her absent father. After the ceremony, the celebration moved to the grounds of the nearly completed hospital, which would open its doors the following month. Tables had been set up in what would eventually be the hospital garden, and the entire town seemed to have turned out for the feast. Mayor Harrison, who had become one of Olivia's unlikely supporters after she successfully removed his gallstones, raised his glass in a toast. To Dr. Olivia Lawson and her husband Jake, may their union be as healing for each other as the doctor's hands have been for our town. Cheers rang out across the gathering. Olivia, nestled against Jake's side, looked around at the faces of people who had once shunned her but now celebrated her happiness and felt a profound sense of belonging. "Happy," Jake murmured against her hair. "Completely," she assured him, turning to meet his kiss. The new hospital opened in May, a modest but well-equipped facility with 6 beds, an operating room, and quarters for a nurse. Olivia continued her regular practice while overseeing the hospital, hiring a young widow named Clara Simmons as nurse and administrative help. Jake and Olivia settled into married life with remarkable ease. They split their time between the ranch and the rooms above her practice, eventually deciding to build a home halfway between town and the Rocking L, close enough for Olivia to reach her patients quickly, but far enough out to give them privacy and space. The house was completed just before their first anniversary, a handsome structure of local stone with wide windows to capture the desert views and a wraparound porch where they could watch the sunset together. Jake surprised Olivia with a fully equipped medical room off the main entrance, where she could treat emergency cases without bringing them into their living quarters. Life was busy but fulfilling. Jake expanded the rocking Elticus operations, breeding horses as well as cattle, while Olivia's reputation as a skilled physician spread throughout the territory. Occasionally, she still encountered prejudice, a new family in town who refused her services, or a traveling businessman who expressed shock at a female doctor, but these instances became increasingly rare. In the summer of 1875, Olivia made a discovery that filled her with both joy and trepidation. After confirming her suspicions with all the professional detachment she could muster, she waited for Jake to return from a cattle drive to share the news. Jake arrived home dusty and tired, but his face lit up at the sight of his wife waiting on the porch. He swung down from his horse and bounded up the steps to sweep her into his arms. "I missed you," he said, kissing her thoroughly despite his trail-worn state. "I missed you too," Olivia replied, leading him inside where a bath awaited him, "and I have something to tell you." Jake's expression grew serious at her tone. "Is everything all right?" Olivia nodded, suddenly nervous. "Jake, I'm going to have a baby in about 6 months, judging by my calculations." For a moment, Jake simply stared at her, his expression blank with shock. Then a slow smile spread across his face, transforming it with joy. "A baby," he repeated, his voice filled with wonder. "We're going to have a child. You're happy about this?" Olivia asked, still uncertain. They had never explicitly discussed children, both so busy with their respective work. Jake gathered her into his arms again, more gently this time. "Happy doesn't begin to describe it. Olivia, you've given me so much already, your love, your partnership, and now this." He placed a reverent hand on her still flat abdomen. "It's more than I ever dared hope for." Relief washed over Olivia, followed by her own surge of joy. She had worried about how pregnancy and motherhood would affect her practice, whether she could balance her roles as doctor, wife, and mother. But with Jake's support, she felt confident they would find a way. As Olivia's pregnancy progressed, adjustments were necessary. Clara took on more responsibilities at the hospital, and Jake hired an additional hand at the ranch to free up more of his time. The town, now fully appreciative of their doctor, rallied around her. Patients rescheduled non-urgent appointments, women brought meals and baby clothes, and Mayor Harrison officially appointed Clara as assistant health officer to manage minor cases. In January 1876, during a rare snowstorm that blanketed Roswell in white, Olivia went into labor. Despite her medical knowledge, or perhaps because of it, she found herself anxious as the contractions intensified. "The irony isn't lost on me," she gasped to Jake as he helped her through a particularly strong pain. "I've delivered countless babies, but now you're the patient, not the doctor," Jake finished for her, wiping her brow with a cool cloth. "It's all right to be afraid, Olivia, I'm right here." Clara arrived through the snow to assist, and after 14 hours of labor, Olivia delivered a healthy son with a shock of dark hair and eyes that promised to be as blue as his father's. They named him James Walter Lawson James for Jake's father, Walter for the foreman whose injury had first brought them together. As Olivia held her son to her breast, Jake sitting beside them with awe written across his features, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. From the isolated cabin where she had practiced her medicine in virtual exile to this moment of perfect contentment surrounded by love. "What are you thinking?" Jake asked, gently stroking James's tiny head. "I'm thinking that sometimes the hardest paths lead to the most beautiful destinations," Olivia replied, smiling up at her husband. "And that I wouldn't change a single step that led me to you and to him." Jake leaned down to kiss her softly. "Nor would I, my love, nor would I." Little James thrived, a good-natured baby who soon became a fixture in Olivia's office, sleeping in a basket behind her desk or charming patients in the waiting room while Clara minded him during examinations. By the time he was 6 months old, he was the unofficial mascot of both the town and the Rocking L, doted on by ranch hands and townspeople alike. Olivia found that motherhood, while challenging, didn't diminish her abilities as a physician. If anything, it enhanced her empathy, particularly when treating children and their worried parents. She adjusted her schedule to allow for nursing and rest, but continued her practice with Jake's unwavering support. The hospital flourished under their joint management, expanding to 10 beds within the first year and adding a small isolation ward for contagious diseases. When the railroad finally reached Roswell in late 1877, bringing increased commerce and population, the town council voted unanimously to allocate funds for further expansion. On James's second birthday, as friends and family gathered at the ranch to celebrate, Jake pulled Olivia aside to a quiet corner of the veranda. "I've been thinking," he said, his expression earnest, "about how much has changed since that day I brought Walter to your cabin." Olivia smiled, leaning into his embrace. "Everything has changed, for the better." "Not everything," Jake corrected. "My love for you has only grown stronger, but I've been considering our future and I have a proposition for you." Intrigued, Olivia raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening." "The territory is growing. More doctors are needed, especially women doctors who can treat female patients with understanding. What would you think about starting a small medical college here in Roswell? Nothing grand at first, just a place where a few students could apprentice, learn from your experience." Olivia stared at him, stunned by the scope of his vision. "A medical college here?" Jake nodded. "You always talk about how fortunate you were to attend the women's medical college, how it changed your life. What if you could offer that opportunity to others, women who might not be able to travel east or afford the larger institutions?" The idea took root in Olivia's mind, blossoming with possibilities. "It would take years to establish," she said slowly, thinking aloud. "We'd need proper facilities, resources, approval from medical societies." "We have time," Jake said simply. "And between your reputation and my resources, I believe we could make it happen. Not overnight, but gradually. You could start with 1 or 2 apprentices, then grow from there." Olivia thought of the young women she occasionally encountered who expressed interest in medicine but had no path forward, no opportunity to pursue their calling. "Could she provide that path? It would be a legacy," she murmured. "Something that would continue beyond us, helping people for generations." "Exactly." Jake's eyes were alight with enthusiasm. "What do you say? Shall we build another dream together?" In that moment, looking into her husband's face, surrounded by the life they had created together, Olivia felt a certainty that transcended mere happiness. This was purpose, fulfillment, love in its most expansive form. "Yes," she said, kissing him with all the passion of their first embrace. "Let's begin." Across the garden, little James tottered toward them, his face smeared with birthday cake, his arms outstretched for his parents. Jake swept him up, and Olivia wrapped her arms around them both, her family, her heart. The journey had been difficult, the prejudice and isolation nearly unbearable at times. But standing here now, Olivia knew that every struggle had been worthwhile. She had remained true to her calling, refused to surrender her dreams, and in doing so had found not just professional respect but deep personal joy. She thought of that day, 4 years ago, when Jake Lawson had arrived at her isolated cabin with an injured foreman and an open mind. How one moment, one decision, one act of courage could alter the course of so many lives. "I love you," she whispered to Jake, who smiled back at her over their son's dark head. "And I love you, Doctor," he replied, his voice rich with meaning, "today and always." As the celebration continued around them, Olivia Calloway Lawson stood within the circle of her husband's arm, her son between them, and looked toward the future. They would build together a future of healing, learning, and love that would extend far beyond their own lives, touching countless others for generations to come. In the years that followed, Olivia's dream of a medical college took shape gradually but steadily. By the time James was 5, she had taken on 2 apprentices, a local girl named Eliza Morton, whose aptitude for science had impressed Olivia since she'd treated the girl's broken arm at age 12, and Rebecca Whitman, a widow from Santa Fe whose husband had been a physician's assistant before his death. The Roswell Medical Institute, as it came to be known, started modestly in rooms adjacent to the hospital. Olivia developed a structured curriculum based on her own education, but adapted to the practical needs of frontier medicine. Jake used his connections to secure donations of medical texts, equipment, and eventually, funding from territorial officials interested in expanding medical care in New Mexico. Their family grew as well. In 1879, Olivia gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl they named Thomas and Elizabeth. The delivery was difficult, leaving Olivia weakened for months afterward, but she recovered fully under Jake's devoted care. James, now a serious and thoughtful child of 4, took his role as older brother seriously, solemnly promising his father that he would always protect the babies. The Rocking L Ranch prospered under Jake's management, expanding to include not only cattle and horses, but also experimental crops suited to the arid climate. He worked closely with agricultural specialists from back east, implementing new irrigation techniques that transformed portions of the desert into productive farmland. As the children grew, they developed distinct personalities and interests. James, with his father's blue eyes and his mother's analytical mind, showed an early interest in both ranching and medicine. By age 10, he could deliver a foal as competently as many of the ranch hands, and had begun to accompany Olivia on simple house calls where he would help carry her bag and observe her work with patience. Thomas, more exuberant and adventurous, loved nothing more than riding with his father across the ranch lands, learning the business from the ground up. Elizabeth, thoughtful and determined, divided her time between helping in Olivia's office and assisting Jake with his correspondence, showing an aptitude for both medicine and management that suggested she might one day combine these skills as her parents had done. The medical college expanded as Roswell grew. By 1886, it occupied its own building near the now substantial hospital, with dormitories for students, lecture halls, and laboratory facilities. Graduates of the program, both men and women, spread throughout the territory and beyond, bringing quality medical care to communities that had previously gone without. Olivia, now 45, had scaled back her direct patient care to focus on teaching and administration, though she still consulted on difficult cases and performed surgery when necessary. Her red-gold hair was threaded with silver now, and fine lines framed her green eyes, but Jake frequently told her she was more beautiful to him with each passing year. Jake himself, nearing 50, had weathered into the archetype of a successful rancher, his frame still strong, but his face lined by years in the sun, his hair more salt than pepper. He had gradually delegated more of the ranch's daily operations to capable managers, including Thomas, who, at 16, was already showing remarkable business acumen. One evening, as they sat on the porch of their home watching the sunset paint the desert gold and crimson, Jake took Olivia's hand in his thumb brushing over the wedding band he'd placed there 13 years before. "You ever think about how different our lives might have been?" he asked, his voice contemplative. If Walter hadn't broken his leg that day, Olivia leaned her head against his shoulder, considering. "Sometimes, I might still be in that cabin, treating outlaws and outcasts bitter and alone. You might have married some proper Eastern lady who never questioned your decisions," Jake chuckled. "That sounds thoroughly uninteresting." "Thoroughly," Olivia agreed with a smile. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. "You know," Jake said finally, "I've been thinking about James's future. He's torn between medicine and ranching, doesn't want to choose." "I've noticed," Olivia replied. "He has aptitude for both. What would you think about establishing a veterinary program at the Institute? There's increasing need as the territory develops, and it would be a perfect combination of both worlds for James if he's interested." Olivia turned to look at her husband, still surprised sometimes by the way his mind worked, always reaching forward, building, creating. "That's a wonderful idea. We could start small, perhaps with a specialization for existing students, then develop it into a full program." Jake nodded, pleased. I've already discussed it with some of the large ranchers in the area. They're enthusiastic about the possibility of locally trained veterinarians who understand the specific challenges of the territory. You've been planning this for a while, Olivia observed, not upset but amused by his thoroughness. Just considering possibilities, Jake corrected, squeezing her hand. As we always have. From inside the house came the sound of children's voices, Elizabeth calling something to her brothers, Thomas responding with a laugh. The familiar, beloved sounds of their family, their legacy. "We've built something remarkable here," Olivia said softly. "Not just the institute or the ranch, but this family, this life." "We have," Jake agreed, drawing her closer. "And we're not finished yet." As night settled fully over the New Mexico landscape, Jake and Olivia Lawson remained on their porch, hands clasped, hearts aligned, still dreaming and planning together as they had since the day a desperate cowboy had brought an injured man to a lonely doctor's door. In the town below, lights twinkled in windows, many of them homes and businesses that existed because of the Lawsons' influence and vision. The hospital glowed brightest of all, a beacon of healing in what had once been a place of prejudice and limitation. And in that moment, as on countless others over the years, Olivia knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be, not just a doctor, not just a wife and mother, but a woman who had refused to accept the boundaries others tried to impose, who had instead created her own path and invited others to follow. "I love you, Jake Lawson," she whispered, turning to meet his kiss. "And I love you, Dr. Olivia Lawson," he replied, his voice as warm and steady as it had been on the day he'd first spoken those words. "Today and always." Above them, stars filled the vast desert sky, witnesses to a love story that had transformed not just two lives but an entire community, a story that would continue to unfold through their children, their students, and all the lives they had touched, for generations yet to come.